Upon returning home from a business trip in the morning, I found two wine glasses on the table. My wife explained that our neighbor had dropped by and they spent the night chatting late into the evening. Later, the neighbor mentioned that his partner Nadine had left for Florida with the children 2 weeks ago. My wife had deceived me, and now I was left pondering the reasons behind her actions. A few years back, my longtime friend Roy Alden lost his job. He was burdened with debts, an unpaid mortgage, and no promising offers. At that point in time, I had already established myself and owned 3 high-end auto shops in Columbus. Given our history, I felt compassionate towards him as a person and decided to assist. I offered him a position within my company as an ordinary worker. Roy adapted swiftly to his new environment. He worked without any issues, and 6 months later I promoted him to foreman. Over time, I grew to rely on him, trusting him with increasingly significant responsibilities. Roy was well liked by others and had extensive knowledge of auto shops operations. For several years, my wife Diane managed our company's finances as the chief accountant. She oversaw the financial records, reports, and payments. Our lives revolved around the auto shops. An opportunity arose in the spring to establish multiple new auto shops in another city. The project was substantial, requiring nearly a month of my on-site presence. Before leaving, I confidently placed the entire business under Roy's supervision. He was expected to manage the shops during my absence. At that time, I felt no concerns. I trusted him implicitly. Time passed quickly. There was more work than anticipated, but the launch progressed smoothly. Once essential matters were settled, I decided to return home to Columbus for a few days. Upon arriving in the city early in the morning, I bought a bouquet of white calla lilies for Deanne and quietly entered our house. In the coat rack, I spotted a cashmere bomber jacket that wasn't mine. I paused and stealthily moved towards the kitchen. There on the kitchen island were 2 empty glasses with residual white wine and one bearing lipstick marks. Nearby was a small plate with leftover prosciutto and figs and a white napkin containing cigarette ash. I carried the calla bouquet to the second-floor bedroom, where Diane lay asleep facing the window. The room was dark as the curtains were drawn. Upon my entrance, she stirred and opened her eyes. For an instant, she seemed unsure before replacing it with a smile. I placed the flowers on the nightstand and inquired about the previous night's visitor. Diane replied that it was Nadine, our neighbor. She had dropped by and brought a bottle of white wine. They drank from it and conversed briefly. I then recalled seeing a man's bomber jacket in the closet. My wife gracefully stirred in bed, yawned, and questioned what bomber I was referring to, seeming taken aback. After a brief moment of contemplation, she frowned slightly. Then, chuckling gently, she mentioned it was likely the coat she took home from work the previous evening. Deanne further explained that the shop grew chilly towards the end of her shift, so she grabbed an unclaimed item from the reception area's rack to avoid freezing on her way to her car. She tossed aside the covers, gazed at me with a smile, and whispered quietly, "Warren, are you feeling envious?" The following day, I returned from the auto shop, whereupon I encountered our closest neighbor, Chuck, near the garage. He was unhurriedly emptying grocery bags from his pickup's trunk, noticed my car, smiled warmly, and extended a friendly greeting with a wave. Chuck strolled over, shook my hand firmly, and inquired about my work trip and whether everything I had planned in the other city went according to schedule. I mentioned that the large new project had taken off smoothly. Moreover, I admitted to missing my wife the most due to her working late and managing household duties all month. I wanted to treat her by sending her to a luxurious resort for complete relaxation and work detachment. My neighbor acknowledged this with a nod and suggested I have her contact Nadine. It turned out that she was vacationing with her children at the sunny coast of Destin, Florida. They stayed in an excellent hotel boasting a pristine, peaceful beach and quality service. Hesitantly, I questioned the neighbor about their location, asking him slowly, "Wait, what do you mean by the sea?" My neighbor appeared puzzled, then laughed briefly, perhaps believing I was merely fatigued from the long drive and jesting with him. "Don't be ridiculous, Warren," he dismissed me casually. "She couldn't have been at your place last night. They were here in your kitchen with white wine, remember." 2 weeks ago, Nadine traveled to Florida. She won't return to Columbus until the end of the month. My silence towards Chuck hinted at growing suspicions in my mind. My wife had deceived me, and I was left puzzling over the reasons why. On Friday morning, I arrived at work early, preoccupied with thoughts of my conversation from yesterday with the neighbor. Inside the repair shop, I ran into one of our longtime mechanics, Vince, who regularly arrived before everyone else and left after everyone else. Curious about his well-being, I inquired how things were. He disclosed that he needed to share some personal information with me. I invited him to my office, and we both made coffee before sitting down at the table. Vince's intense gaze suggested this conversation would not be easy for him. He confessed that during my absence, he had observed an unusual behavior pattern between Roy and Diane. As per him, once work hours ended and everyone departed, he and Roy left together in Roy's vehicle. Furthermore, throughout the day, Roy frequently visited Diane's office, leading Vince to imply, though possibly overstating it, that something beyond merely working together was occurring between them. I listened attentively, striving to maintain composure despite turmoil within me. I genuinely thanked Vince for his honesty, counsel, and courage in expressing his suspicions. I requested him to keep this discussion confidential from the shop workers temporarily, but pieces of a puzzle were beginning to fall into place in my mind. An untouched glass of wine on the table, my wife's deception, a stranger's jacket hanging in our home, and now Vince's doubts too. I planned to revisit this matter later. Upon my return, I hadn't reviewed the store earnings, so I headed to my office. Upon opening the internal accounting system's bank statements, I noticed a significant decrease of around half in monthly revenue. Immediately, I summoned Frank, the head foreman of our central auto shop, and demanded an explanation for this substantial drop. He expressed his frustration openly. He stated that customers continued to pour in as usual, the bays were never idle, and the workers were constantly busy. However, Roy had audaciously been handling some major and costly orders privately with clients, pocketing the money himself. To silence the mechanics, he involved 2 junior foremen, offering them a share of the profits. To dispel any suspicions, Frank summoned those 2 juniors right then and there into the office in my presence. The young mechanics, fearing dismissal, immediately admitted to everything. They verified he paid them in cash for tasks completed during his shift's end. After the discussion, Frank banged on the table and asserted, "He's been growing overly confident here this month, as if he owns the place." I listened to Frank until the end. I acknowledged understanding and pledged prompt resolution. Exiting the office, I entered the repair area where Roy was waiting in his men's cashmere bomber. He flashed a broad grin and assured me with a pat on the shoulder. Doubts lingered, but they were dwindling. I had come to suspect that Roy had been embezzling from the shop, yet I didn't want to believe my wife, Diane, was involved too. But I needed proof. On Friday afternoon, I went into Diane's office. I informed her about unforeseen issues arising at the fresh sites, necessitating my immediate departure over the weekend and return only by Sunday night. Diane offered a compassionate nod and kissed me goodbye on the cheek. As evening approached, I hopped in the car and departed. Diane watched me leave from our house doorstep, fully aware that I was leaving town for several days. However, I secretly spent the weekend at a tranquil hotel near Columbus. I waited until nightfall before exiting my car on the adjacent street and stealthily returning to the house. Upon arrival, Roy's pickup truck was peacefully parked in our driveway. Crossing the soft lawn toward the backyard, I peered through the large kitchen window where candles illuminated the dimly lit room. In the candlelight, I saw them. Diane sat at the table adorned in a silk robe, and Roy was seated beside her. The atmosphere in the kitchen was romantic. Candles were arranged on the table. They appeared to be savoring steaks and sharing wine. My lingering doubts dissipated entirely. I withdrew my phone, recorded a video, and returned to the car. Despite an impulse to storm into the kitchen and wreck everything within, I planned to sever ties with both of them completely by Monday. Instead, I contacted our corporate attorney, relaying the situation and requesting him to expedite termination documents for Roy due to egregious breach of contract and intentional harm to the company. By Sunday evening, the folder containing all the completed documents was in my room. Next, I visited the auto shop where the system administrator was already present. I instructed him to restrict Diane's and Roy's access to work computers, databases, and remote servers. Later that night, I sat in my office, contemplating the dismissal orders for my dear wife and cherished friend, reflected on my years of friendship with Roy. I recalled the day he initially entered my store. At that time, Roy seemed as if his life had pushed him against a wall. He was thankful for any opportunity to begin anew. I remembered my delight in witnessing his early triumphs, how I stood up for him when other staff members questioned whether he deserved such swift trust with important tasks, how I felt pride knowing I assisted my old friend in regaining self-confidence. I wondered at the exact moment everything shifted. The day gratitude morphed into envy and respect dissolved into greed. And why, after being given a chance to start anew, he chose to use it for deceit. Yet the thoughts concerning Diane were even more challenging. From a friend, one can expect anything. People come and go, but a spouse is someone you put your life in trust's hands. Someone who knows every aspect of you, your vulnerabilities, phobias, aspirations, and dreams. For so long, our lives were intertwined that distinguishing mine from hers became impossible. Most of my significant memories were linked to her. We collaborated on building this business, weathered tough times together, and reveled in every fresh achievement jointly. Reviewing the termination papers for Roy felt merely like a business move, albeit a difficult and necessary one. However, documents bearing Diane's name signified the closure of an entire phase of my life. The dismantling of the once-thought unbreakable family that I had nurtured for years was what hit the hardest. On Monday, at precisely 9 a.m., I summoned Diane and Roy to my office. They walked in together, radiating self-assurance and calmness. Roy extended his hand for a friendly shake, as he usually did, but I chose to disregard it. Instead, I faced them and played the video on my laptop. The smile quickly disappeared from Roy's face, leaving him looking pale and retreating a step. Diane clamped her hand over her mouth in terror, fixed on the screen. Our kitchen was shown there, candles adorning the table, glasses of wine, Diane and Roy seated side by side. I declared, "I didn't leave town this weekend." Hence, I witnessed all that transpired within my house. A thick hush filled the office as Roy attempted to speak, but I halted him with a gesture. I then extracted the folder containing financial reports and placed it before him. "Did you think in a month you would own this place, Roy?" I leaned closer, watching him grow pale. "I rescued you from destitution. I'm aware of every penny you embezzled from the company. You were so audacious as to forget. This enterprise is mine. You have overstepped your bounds, Roy. Your mortgage burden is yours once more. Sign the order and vacate the office." Roy nervously took the pen and silently signed the documents, departing the office. I turned my gaze towards Diane. "Warren, imploring you to listen, let me explain." Roy inadvertently discombobulated my thoughts as the day I returned from business travel replayed before me. Two glasses on the kitchen island, a man's bomber jacket hanging on the rack, her serene smile, the tale about Nadine who allegedly dropped by for an evening of wine. A blunder, not a deliberate action. I whispered my inquiry softly. "A mistake is an erroneous document, but your relationship with my closest friend is far from one. You also endangered our family business. As I managed affairs in another city, you let your lover jeopardize our company." Diane remained seated at the table, gazing at me perplexedly. "Warren, I swear to you, I was unaware of it all. I merely got mixed up and did something reckless. Don't tear down what we've spent over 2 decades building." I let out a deep sigh. "This isn't over today, Diane. It ended the instant the two of you decided you could act without my knowledge. Effective immediately, you are no longer employed at the company. 1. All accesses to accounts, databases, and financial systems have been restricted. Here's the termination notice." Just a week ago, I hadn't imagined this dialogue would take place, yet I had nothing left to contribute. Diane quietly stood up from her chair and walked towards the door. I trailed my gaze after her. That day, I lost the 2 dearest individuals I had ever trusted beyond comparison. A few months later, our divorce proceeded smoothly, minus any tumultuous court cases. Diane received what she was legally entitled to and vanished from my life permanently. Life in Columbus resumed its usual, tranquil pace. The auto shop network continued thriving, yielding a constant income stream. One evening, I found myself sitting in my office. The day's work was wrapping up, the bays were dimming, and the staff were quietly leaving for home. 2. All accesses to accounts, databases, and finances have been barred. Here's the dismissal order. A week ago, I hadn't conceived that this discussion would occur. Nonetheless, there was nothing more I could say. Diane rose slowly from her seat and left for the door. I watched her with my eyes. That day, I lost the 2 individuals I had once trusted above all others. A few months later, our divorce went through smoothly, spared of any courtroom drama. Diane received what was legally owed to her and vanished from my life forever. Life in Columbus gradually returned to its regular, peaceful rhythm. The auto shop network continued flourishing, generating a steady income. One evening, I sat in my office. The workday was ending, the lights were dimming in the bays, and the staff were peacefully departing home. I drank my cold coffee, closed the laptop containing financial reports, then sat quietly for a while, gazing at the vacant chairs opposite my desk. The recollections of the betrayal by those close to me no longer stirred any feelings of pain, anger, or need to prove myself to others. A sense of apathy had settled in. I rose, walked towards the panoramic window, and watched the evening cityscape. The most challenging phase of my life was now in the past. I gathered my keys, switched off the office light, and securely locked the large wooden door. Tomorrow promised a fresh, ordinary workday, and I was fully prepared to continue along my new, unsoiled path. What did you think of this tale? Would you entrust your friend with the care of your family and business for an entire month? Or are there things that one can't confide in anyone? Share your thoughts below. Subscribe. There are many more captivating stories to come.